I think to sell better, what do we mean by better? I think, well, what's the purpose of the sale? Peter Drucker said the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. So how do you create a customer? It would be helpful to know what their problems are, what they want, what they think they want that they may not need, what they need, who they are, where they come from, how they got to you, how they got to a position of thinking that you might be the service provider or the company that you represent could solve their problem. All of this is going to be done through asking questions. But oftentimes I see training or read books on sales, leadership, business that talk about the importance of asking questions, that attempt to distill or discuss and attempt to implement frameworks or methodologies around listening and asking questions. And I think that's all very helpful and necessary. However, what if it's actually a philosophical, psychological, or character, core value, culture conversation? Meaning, I could believe that I need to ask questions. I could believe that listening is important. I could even know how to do those things. But what if I don't actually, I'm not in a spirit of thinking about the other person? What if I don't actually care? Maybe the knowledge, maybe the understanding, or maybe even the belief that listening and asking questions was important to serve the customer. What if the actual activity of doing those things had a relationship with the culture piece, the driving narrative that's leading me to be that service provider? Why am I actually doing it? What inspires me to help others or provide solutions to their problems? Who am I and how do I relate to my company? How do I relate to my counterpart? If the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer, then we're going to do that by solving the customer's problems. But how am I going to ask the best questions and lean into the conversation if I don't actually care? If I'm not invested in the other, I'm operating from a standpoint of me and only me. Now, inherently, there is a part of any relationship in business where the self-interest of the business, the self-interest of the salesperson, the self-interest of the entrepreneur is there. Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations beat that argument to death. It's not the benevolence of the butcher, but it's the self-interest. However, additionally, consciously, if I'm focused on the other person, I'm taking account of how, yes, I want the outcome. I benefit from the outcome. However, I actually am not in control of the outcome. I don't know if I'm the best or if the company is the best for them, because how could we be the best for everyone? I'm starting with that philosophy of I don't know. There's a humility. There's an inherent inquiry or an implicit empathy that will follow. It's about the other person. Yes, implicitly, inherently, it's about me. I have my own selfish goals and my own selfish desires, and I'm accountable to the organization to hit a certain outcome, a certain key performance, a certain insert whatever motivation that I need to not avoid making the sacrifices, leaning into the conflict, facing my fears and anxieties of what could happen. I've got to do the work. I've got to show up. I've got to be able to respond to the conflicts. I've got to be responsible. I have to sell. At the same time, I'm not in control of the outcomes 100% because people have different goals. People have different desires. And it's going to be on a spectrum for how well I can actually help or how well the organization can actually help. It'll be at some percentage. So what's the solution? Yeah, the solution would be being in a position and be able to ask the pertinent questions, listen to understand, put oneself in the potential customer's shoes, be prepared and have as much information on the potential customer as possible so the best and highest value questions can be asked. Listen to understand, to figure out, is there really something here? Have the courage to ask for the business, and at the same time be open and empathetic with the rationalizations that come back, with the information that's thrown back, to try to figure out what is in the best benefit of one's counterpart as possible in the short term and in the long term. I think if the conversation just focuses solely on that questions are important to ask and that listening is important to ask, but the teleology or the purpose, well, why? Because it's about them first, us second. Because it's already inherently about us and our own, for a salesperson, our own interest, our own self-interest. We're accountable to the organization, and we're responsible for our results, and we're accountable to our family, or we're accountable to whoever outside. That is why we want something. That's there no matter what. So the belief structure or the philosophy is, well, what about them? And that humility, if you want to call it, that empathy, that compassion, that foresight or faith, restraint, to lean in and actually make it about the potential customer, I think that brings, that comes before the dialogue, the conceptualization of, knowing that we have to ask questions, we have to listen. Because if we take that out and it's just, these are the questions and this is the listening, then we're not relating to the customer as an end in themselves. They're a means to our end. And ultimately that can work. That may work for you. But the argument that I would make would be that would become boring. That would be riddled with anxiety. Whereas the other standpoint where I actually do care about the other person. I'm working through my own ego, my own self-interest, which is implicit in the relationship, and I'm seeking to build a relationship. It's not going to be a sale and then it's over, and in turn, a relational transaction. It will be the beginning of a relationship which can be fruitful for both parties, and there's a balance between my self-interest, the customer's benefit. Because there's two parties with two self-interests that are coming together. And when both self-sacrifice, there's an exchange of value, of course, from a capital standpoint. Money invested for goods and services, sure. But there's goodwill that's developed. There's a relationship that's developed that impacts the relationship that I have as a salesperson, as a potential leader someday, right? Because if I go from sales to now I'm in a position of management, it's my core values that I'm selling. Like, how did I actually get up there? How did I show up to the customers? That's what the future people are learning through osmosis. They're watching how I sold. They're watching how I communicated. They're watching and modeling my philosophies. So I think the sales conversation should start with a philosophical and a cultural or core value standpoint of, who are we really working for here? Ourselves and only ourselves, or ourselves and the customer? The ego, the idea that the brain asks questions, the ego talks, that dichotomy has value to think about. The ego talks. I'm making it solely about me. Now it is inherently about me, but it's ultimately service to the other. The customer is getting value, investing capital in the goods or service to combat one's ego, which is the driving force of the interaction. I'm putting myself in the customer's shoes. I'm having an awareness. I'm having an understanding of where they're coming from. And questions are the bridge to gather the information, to gather the data, which does two things. One, it can increase the likelihood of them wanting to work with me or the company or retain the service, buy the good. Sure, but think of that as that's extra. That's out of my control. What it does for me is it's an act of service. It's an act of humility. It's opening up the ability to gather the content that's going to lead to the context, so that as a professional, I can help my counterpart, that potential customer, make a decision that is best for them. And it's not going to be black and white, always so clear what's best for them. We're co-creating that clarity. And it's at bottom a relationship between salesperson, customer, and that co-creation that reflects what they should do.